Imagine standing on a stage. The lights are blindingly bright, and a roar of applause is echoing through the arena. This is the moment I've spent my entire life training for. The adrenaline is surging, my heart is hammering against my ribs, and for the first time in 18 years, I can finally breathe. But here's the thing, the most shocking part of that moment wasn't the victory itself. It was the silence. Not from the crowd, but from my phone. Not a single person from my family was in those stands. I didn't tell them I was there. I didn't tell them I had won. And as I looked out into the sea of strangers, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't a prize to be fought over or a weapon to be used in a decades-long war. I was just me. But to understand why a daughter would shut out her entire family during the biggest achievement of her life, you have to understand the chaos I was born into. Most people have a family tree. I have a crime scene. It all started before I even took my first breath. My parents didn't just have a messy divorce. They had a systematic demolition of a relationship. They legally split when I was only 1 year old, but the fuse was lit long before that. When my mum was 7 months pregnant with me, heavy, tired, and preparing for motherhood, everything imploded. It turned out my dad had been seeing another woman and had actually gotten her pregnant at the exact same time. But my mum wasn't exactly the grieving, betrayed wife you'd imagine. While my dad was out starting a secret second family, my mum was having an affair of her own. When I was born, there was a legitimate question hanging over my cradle. Who is the father? My mum wasn't sure if it was my dad or the man she was cheating with. For the first year of my life, while other babies were being rocked to sleep, I was the subject of DNA tests and legal filings. It turned out that my dad was, in fact, my biological father, but by then, the damage was irreversible. They stayed separated for that first year, and the moment the ink was dry on the divorce papers, they both did the exact same thing. They married the people they had been cheating with. So, from the age of 1, my world was populated by 4 adults who absolutely, fundamentally loathed each other. There was my mum and my stepdad, the man who helped break up my parents' marriage. And there was my dad and my stepmum, the woman who had been pregnant with my half-brother while my mum was pregnant with me. You can probably imagine the atmosphere. It wasn't just tension. It was a perpetual state of nuclear standby. Growing up, I didn't have a home. I had 2 opposing camps. Every custody exchange felt like a prisoner swap at a border crossing. I remember being 5 years old, standing on the sidewalk with my little pink backpack, watching my mum's car pull up to my dad's driveway. The air would literally turn cold. My mum wouldn't get out of the car. My dad would stand on the porch like he was guarding a fortress. If a single word was exchanged, it usually ended in a scream that the neighbours could hear. Things got so toxic that the legal system actually had to intervene in a way I've rarely heard of for anyone else. Because I have a couple of chronic medical conditions, I had to see specialists frequently. These weren't just quick checkups. They were high-stakes appointments that required both parents to be informed. But my parents couldn't even be in a sterile doctor's office without starting a riot. During one of the many custody hearings, a judge, who I can only imagine was completely exhausted by their nonsense, actually issued a formal court order. My parents were legally prohibited from bringing their spouses to any of my medical appointments, custody exchanges, or school events where both biological parents needed to be present. The judge literally told them they had to leave the other man and the other woman at home because their presence was a safety hazard to my well-being. They were even ordered to attend civil communication classes, which is basically preschool for adults who don't know how to use their words without swearing. For the first 8 years of my life, they actually followed the rules. I think the fear of jail time kept them in check. For those years, medical appointments were just two people sitting on opposite sides of a waiting room, staring at their phones, radiating pure, concentrated hatred. It was uncomfortable, sure, but it was quiet. But then, as I hit my 9th birthday, it was like they both just said, forget it. The rules were abandoned. The no step-parents boundary was trampled. Suddenly, it wasn't just two people who hated each other in the room, it was 4. My mum claimed my stepmum was disruptive and had no right to hear my medical history. My dad claimed my stepdad was an intruder who was trying to play father. They would openly admit to cursing each other out in front of my doctors. I have these vivid, core memories of being sat on an exam table in a paper gown, feeling the cold air on my skin, while the 4 adults supposed to be caring for me were being escorted out of the building by hospital security. I would sit there, listening to the muffled sounds of them screaming in the hallway, while my doctor looked at me with this expression of pure, unadulterated pity. Do you know how humiliating that is? To be the reason a hospital has to call a code silver because your parents can't stop trying to tear each other's throats out. And then there was the sibling situation. This is where it gets truly twisted. Remember how my dad got his mistress pregnant at the same time as my mum? That boy, my half-brother, is only a few months younger than me. And my stepdad? He was with another woman when he started his affair with my mum. And he has a child who is about 6 months older than me. My entire life, I have been surrounded by these mirror siblings, reminders of the infidelity that created me. But to my parents, these kids weren't just my siblings. They were chess pieces. My parents spent every single day arguing over whose family was more important to me. My dad would guilt-trip me, telling me I needed to spend more time with his kids to show my loyalty to his side of the bloodline. My mom would counterattack, insisting that my bond with her new family was the only thing that mattered. Every interaction was scrutinized. If I played a video game with my half-brother at my dad's house, my mum would find out and spend the next week crying about how I loved them more. If I helped my stepbrother with his homework, my dad would accuse me of being brainwashed by my stepdad. I was under constant, suffocating pressure to rank my love for these children who had done nothing wrong, but who represented everything my parents hated about their own lives. I remember one specific day at school that really broke something inside me. It was a special event where the school photographer was taking sibling portraits. All the kids were lining up with their brothers and sisters, smiling and laughing. I stood there, looking at the line, and I felt this wave of actual nausea. If I took a photo with my dad's kids, my mum would never let me hear the end of it. If I took one with my mum's kids, I'd be betraying my dad. I could see the conflict waiting for me at the end of the school day. My best friend, who is an only child, saw me spiraling. She walked over, took my hand and said, "Let's just take our photo together." So we did. We told the photographer we were chosen sisters. It was the only way I could survive the day without causing a domestic war. But that's what my life was, a series of tactical maneuvers just to avoid a blowout. My relationship with all my siblings is complicated. Or honestly, it's non-existent. We couldn't just be kids. We were symbols of betrayal. And while I know my step-parents played their part in the drama, I don't blame them as much as I blame my biological parents. They were the ones who were supposed to protect me. They were the ones who could have chosen at any point in 18 years to put their egos aside for the sake of their daughter's sanity. But they never did. Not once. It just kept getting worse as I got older. The drama didn't age out, it just evolved. And as my 18th birthday approached, I realized that if I didn't get out, I was going to drown in their resentment. I had been training in my sport since I was a toddler. It was the only place I felt in control, the only place where the rules were clear and nobody was screaming. I knew that my 18th year was going to be my biggest year yet. And I knew I couldn't achieve my dreams if I was still living in their line of fire. So I made a choice. a choice that would change everything. The breaking point didn't happen during one of the big, explosive fights. It happened during a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just a few months before I turned 18. I was sitting at the kitchen table at my dad's house, trying to focus on a biology assignment. My half-brother, the one born just months after me, was in the living room playing a video game. My stepmother was in the kitchen hovering. She wasn't being mean, not exactly, but she was doing that thing she always did. She was territory marking. She was talking loudly on the phone about how much of a blessing her son was, and how he was the true heart of the family. It was a subtle dig, one of 1,000 I'd heard over the years. I was the reminder of the first marriage, the one that failed. My half-brother was the symbol of the new, better life. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mum. She wanted to know why I hadn't posted any photos from my stepbrother's birthday party the weekend before. She wasn't happy I'd gone, but since I had, she wanted to make sure I looked miserable enough so she could feel like she was still my favourite. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at my biology homework. And then I looked at the walls of a house that had never truly felt like home. I realised in that moment that I was 18 years old, and I didn't have a single memory of a holiday, a birthday, or even a doctor's visit that wasn't tainted by their mutual hatred. I was a human rope in a never-ending game of tug-of-war, and I was starting to fray. I was tired. I was so incredibly, bone-deep tired of being a witness to a war I never enlisted in. A few days later, I called my grandma, my dad's mother. She was the only one who seemed to see me, not as a pawn, not as a bio daughter, but as a person. I asked her if I could move in. I told her I couldn't finish high school in those houses anymore. I told her I needed a place where the air didn't feel like it was made of broken glass. To her credit, she didn't ask a million questions. She just said, "Pack your bags. I'll be there in an hour." Moving out was like escaping a cult. My parents were horrified, not because they'd miss me, but because the other side might win if I lived with Grandma. My mum accused my dad of brainwashing me into moving closer to his side of the family. My dad accused my mum of being so toxic that she drove me away. Neither of them could fathom that they were the problem. Both of them, together. Living with my grandma was the first time I ever experienced silence. True, peaceful silence. There were no hushed arguments in the hallway. No one was checking my social media to see if I was smiling too much with the wrong siblings. For the first time, I could just exist. And that's when I really poured everything I had into my training. See, I've been competing in my sport since I was 4 years old. It's the one thing that was truly mine. When I'm on that field, or that court, or that stage, the world goes quiet. All the voices of my parents and my step-parents, all the "who do you love more" and "why aren't you loyal?" It all fades away. It's just me and the goal. My parents always loved the idea of my sport. They loved showing up to my competitions. But not for me. They showed up to out-parent each other. I have memories of standing on podiums, holding a trophy, while my mum and stepdad were on one side of the bleachers, and my dad and stepmum were on the other, literally trying to out-cheer each other. They would scream my name so loudly, it felt like an assault. After the games, they'd rush the field, not to hug me, but to be the first one to get a picture with me to post on Facebook. "My champion daughter," they'd write, followed by a dozen passive-aggressive hashtags aimed at the other side. They turned my greatest passions into their battlegrounds. Every win was a victory for their side. Every loss was an opportunity for one side to blame the other's lack of support. I grew to hate the end of my competitions. I dreaded the final whistle because I knew the second it blew, the ownership ceremony would begin. But after moving in with Grandma, something shifted. I started getting better. Much better. Maybe it was the lack of stress, Or maybe it was just that I was finally doing it for myself. My coaches started talking to me about the professional circuit. This was the dream. This was the pro level, the elite of the elite. One day, I got the email. An invitation to a high-stakes, closed-door trial that would determine if I'd be signed to a professional contract. It was the biggest moment of my life. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. My first instinct, out of 18 years of habit, was to call my parents. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the group chat I had with my mum and dad, and then I stopped. I closed my eyes and imagined them there. I imagined the trial, the scouts, the pressure, the intense focus required. And then I imagined my mum and stepmum getting into a screaming match in the parking lot. I imagined my dad and stepdad refusing to sit on the same bench. I imagined the scouts looking at me, not as a professional athlete, but as the girl with the disruptive family. I imagined the post-trial dinner where they would spend 3 hours arguing over who paid for my first pair of shoes 14 years ago. I realized that if they were there, the moment wouldn't be mine. It would be theirs. It would be another chapter in their war, another trophy for them to fight over. So, I did something I had never done before. I didn't tell them. I told my grandma, of course. She drove me to the trials. She sat in the stands, quiet and proud, wearing a simple sweater and a smile. She didn't bring a banner. She didn't scream until her veins popped. She just watched, and for the first time in my life, I played without fear. I played like I was free. I was faster, sharper, and more focused than I had ever been. When the trial ended and the officials pulled me aside to tell me they wanted me, that I was going pro, I didn't look for a camera. I didn't look for a side. I just looked at Grandma, and we both knew. I signed the papers. I was officially a professional. It was a life-changing achievement, the culmination of 14 years of blood, sweat, and tears. I spent the evening with my grandma, eating a quiet dinner and talking about the future. For one glorious, beautiful day, I was just a girl who had achieved her dream. No drama, no screaming, no loyalty tests, but I knew the peace wouldn't last. I knew that eventually the news would break. My parents have eyes and ears everywhere in our small sporting community. I knew that by keeping this from them, I wasn't just keeping a secret. I was declaring independence. And in my family, independence is seen as an act of treason. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than air, but there was a knot of dread in my stomach. I knew that when they found out, the explosion would be bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. I just didn't realize how much they would try to make me feel like the villain of my own success. The morning after I signed my contract, the world felt different. For the first time, the air in my lungs didn't feel heavy with someone else's expectations. I woke up in my grandma's guest room, the sun streaming through the curtains, and for a few blissful minutes, I forgot about the storm that was brewing. I just laid there, thinking about the fact that I was a professional athlete. I had done it. I had survived the chaos of my childhood and carved out a future that belonged entirely to me. But then, I reached for my phone. It started with a single notification. A local sports blog had picked up the news. Then, the official social media account for the organisation I'd signed with posted a photo of me, the one from the trial, looking focused and fierce, with the caption, "Welcoming our newest rising star to the professional circuit." My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew what was coming. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee before the vibration started. Buzz, 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 buzz. It wasn't just a few texts. It was a digital avalanche. The first message was from my mum. It wasn't, "Congratulations, I'm so proud of you." It was, "I had to find out from a Facebook post. After everything I've sacrificed for your career, after the thousands of miles I drove you, how could you be so cruel?" Seconds later, my dad's name popped up. "I am your father. I am the reason you have the talent you have. To shut me out of the biggest moment of your life is the ultimate disrespect. You've let your mother's side poison your head. Call me now. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. This was exactly why I hadn't told them. Even in my moment of triumph, they managed to make it about themselves. They weren't celebrating my hard work. They were tallying up their investments and demanding their dividends. They weren't hurt because I was gone. They were hurt because they didn't get to stand in the spotlight with me. By noon, the step-parents had joined the fray. My stepdad sent a long, rambling email about how he had treated me like his own daughter and how my secrecy was a slap in the face to the stable home they had provided for me. My stepmom sent a DM on Instagram, which was weird because we never talk, telling me that my dad was heartbroken and that I was being a selfish brat. Then came the siblings. The kids I had been forced to love more or rank my entire life were now being used as emotional leverage. Your brothers are crying, my mum texted. They wanted to see you win. You've broken their hearts. They don't understand why their big sister hates them. It was a lie. My brothers were 10 and 12. They were probably playing Fortnite, completely unaware of the drama. But that didn't matter. In my family, children were just props to be used in the stage play of who is the better parent. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went for a run. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, trying to outrun the guilt that was starting to seep into my bones. Because that's the thing about growing up with parents like mine. You're conditioned to feel like a villain the moment you set a boundary. You're taught that your autonomy is an act of aggression. When I got back to Grandma's house, I saw 2 cars parked out front. One was my mum's SUV. The other was my dad's truck. They were parked on opposite sides of the street, like 2 warships preparing for an engagement. My stomach twisted into a knot. I walked up the driveway and there they were, all 4 of them. My mum and stepdad were on the porch, arguing with my grandma through the screen door. My dad and stepmum were standing by the mailbox, shouting at my mum. She's 18. She doesn't have to talk to you if she doesn't want to, my grandma was yelling. She was 80 years old, but she stood like a stone wall. She's my daughter, my dad roared, pointing a finger at my mum. And if you hadn't spent the last 6 months whispering in her ear at your house, she would have called me. Me, my mum screamed back, stepping off the porch. I haven't seen her in months because of the toxic environment you created. You're the reason she's hiding out here like a fugitive. I stood there at the edge of the lawn, watching them. It was a scene from my entire life, played out on a loop for 18 years. The same accusations, the same finger-pointing, the same complete and total lack of awareness that the person they were fighting over was standing right there, watching the people who were supposed to love her act like monsters. "Stop it!" I yelled. My voice cracked, but it was loud enough to cut through the noise. They all turned. For a split second, there was silence. "Honey!" my mum cried, rushing toward me with her arms open. "Oh, thank God you're okay. We were so worried. Why didn't you tell us? We would have been there. We would have had a party." "Stay away from her, Sarah," my dad snapped, stepping forward to intercept her. "She doesn't want your fake parties. She wants her father." "I don't want either of you," I shouted. The words came out before I could stop them, raw and jagged. "Look at yourselves. I just signed a professional contract. I just achieved the biggest goal of my life, and within 24 hours, you've turned it into a street fight. You haven't asked me how I feel. You haven't asked me if I'm happy. You're just here to claim your piece of the prize." The look on their faces was a mix of shock and indignation. "That's not fair," my stepmom chimed in from the back. "We've supported you since you were a baby. We deserve to be a part of this." "Deserve?" I looked at her. "You deserve what? To scream at each other in the parking lot of my first pro game? To make my teammates wonder why my parents have to be escorted out by security? Because that's what happens every time you're in the same room. I chose to have a peaceful victory. For once in my life, I wanted a memory that didn't involve a police report or a court order. My dad looked like I'd slapped him. "I paid for your trainers," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I paid for the travel teams. You owe me this moment." "I don't owe you my sanity, Dad," I said quietly. "And I don't owe Mum my happiness. You both forfeited the right to be part of the moment the second you decided that hating each other was more important than loving me." I walked past them, up the stairs and into the house. I could hear them starting up again behind me, the blame game, the "look what you made her say" routine. I walked straight to my room, shut the door and locked it. I sat on the floor and cried, not because I was sad I'd won, but because I realised that the war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Now that I was an adult, and now that I had something they wanted, prestige, success, a pro title, they were going to fight harder than ever to own me. The texts didn't stop. They got worse. They started calling me an arsehole. They started telling me that I was discarding my family now that I was famous. They told me I had fucked up my relationship with them forever, and for a while I started to believe them. I lay in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of my grandma finally chasing them off her property. And I wondered if I was the problem. Was I being too hard on them? Was it really so bad to just let them come to the trial? Maybe I was the one being dramatic. Maybe I was the ungrateful daughter they were painting me to be. But then I remembered the doctor's office. I remembered the paper gown and the security guards. I remembered the sibling portraits and the fear in my best friend's eyes. And I realised that the only mistake I'd made was finally saying no to their chaos. The silence in my grandmother's house after they finally drove away was heavy, like the air right before a tornado hits. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, listening to the ticking of the clock in the hallway. For 18 years, that ticking had been the sound of a countdown to the next fight, the next court date, the next time I'd have to choose between two people who claimed to love me, but couldn't even stand in the same zip code as each other. But this time, the countdown was over. I had exploded the status quo. I had committed the ultimate sin in a high-conflict family. I had succeeded without them. My phone was still blowing up. It was vibrating so much it actually skittered across the nightstand and fell onto the floor. I left it there. I didn't want to see the words disappointed, ungrateful, or cruel anymore. I knew the script by heart. My mum would be at home right now, surrounded by wine and my stepdad, recounting every single dollar she'd ever spent on my equipment, as if it were a loan I was now defaulting on. My dad would be pacing his living room, telling my stepmother that I was just like her mother, the ultimate insult in his vocabulary, and that I was intentionally trying to humiliate him in front of the sporting community. About an hour later, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Grandma. She was carrying a tray with a glass of water and some toast. She didn't say anything at first. She just set it down on the desk and sat in the chair opposite me. "They're gone," she said quietly. "I told them if they set foot on my property again without an invitation, I'd call the sheriff. And I meant it." I looked up at her. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp. She had spent decades watching her son, my father, and my mother tear each other apart. She had been the one to pick up the pieces more times than I could count. "Do you think I'm an asshole, Grandma?" I asked. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "They keep saying I fucked up. They keep saying I'm the one who's hurting the family." Grandma sighed, a long, weary sound. "Honey, in this family, hurting the family usually just means refusing to be a shield. For 18 years, you've been the person they stood behind, so they didn't have to look at their own failures. You didn't fuck up. You grew up. And that's the one thing they never prepared for." She stayed with me for a while, just talking about normal things, the weather, the garden, my upcoming training schedule. It was a lifeline, But the world outside that room wasn't done with me. By the next morning, the drama had migrated. It wasn't just in my inbox anymore. It was public. My mum had posted a heartfelt tribute on her Facebook page. It was a photo of me when I was about 6, wearing my first uniform. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. "So proud of my daughter for going pro," it read. "It's been a long, hard road, and I've sacrificed everything to get her here. It hurts that I wasn't allowed to be there for the big moment, and that I found out through the news like a stranger. But I guess that's what happens when children grow up and forget who carried them. I'll always be here, even if I'm being pushed out." The comments were a nightmare. People I hadn't seen in years were chiming in, saying things like, "Oh, Sarah, that's heartbreaking. Kids these days have no respect." And, "How could she do that to you after everything?" Then, my dad, not to be outdone, posted his own tribute. His was a photo of me at a regional championship 2 years ago. "Hard work pays off," he wrote. "Taught her everything she knows about grit. It's a shame when people get a little bit of fame and think they're too good for the father who built them. Money and contracts change people. Sad day." It was a coordinated smear campaign. They were using their social media circles to pressure me into submission. They wanted me to feel so much public shame that I would come crawling back, apologizing for the misunderstanding, and giving them the front row seats they felt entitled to. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. "Hey, it's Leo." Leo was my half-brother, my dad's son, the one who was only a few months younger than me. We had grown up in the same house half the time, but we were never friends. We were competitors for our father's limited attention. We were the physical evidence of a messy timeline. "I saw the posts," the next text read, "and I saw the news about the contract. Congrats, for real. You're the best at what you do, and everyone knows it." I stared at the screen. I waited for the part where he told me Dad was crying, or that I needed to call him. "Don't listen to them," Leo sent. "Dad is just mad he can't use your signing bonus to brag to his friends at the bar. And Mum, my stepmom, is mad because she wanted a picture for her blog. You did the right thing by not telling them. If they'd been there, they would have made it a circus. They always do. Enjoy your win. You earned it." I felt a lump form in my throat. For years, my parents had told me that my siblings were hurt by me, that they resented me, that I had to prove my love to them. And here was Leo, the very person they used as a weapon against me, telling me the truth. He wasn't hurt. He was relieved that someone had finally escaped the blast radius. It gave me the strength to do what I should have done years ago. I didn't respond to the Facebook posts. I didn't call my mum to explain. I didn't apologize to my dad. Instead, walking into that facility was like entering another dimension. It was quiet. It was professional. People were focused on their jobs. There was no screaming. There was no personal drama being aired in the hallways. My coach sat me down and we went over my contract, my training blocks, and my media obligations. "One thing," my coach said, looking over his spectacles at me. "We've seen some activity on social media from your family. We have a very strict policy about guests and facility access. We want to make sure you have a focused environment. Do you need us to handle your guest list for the season opener?" In that moment, I realized that my family's reputation had preceded me. Even the professional world knew they were a liability. I felt a wave of hot, prickly shame wash over me. I was the girl with the crazy parents. The liability. "Yes," I said, my voice firm despite the shame. "I want a closed guest list. No one gets in without my personal written approval for every single game. And I want security to have a list of 4 specific names who are not allowed on the premises." My coach didn't blink. He just nodded and made a note on his tablet. "Consider it done. We're here to support you. not your family's drama. I walked out of that office feeling like I had just put on a suit of armor. For the first time, I had people in my corner who weren't there because of a blood tie or a legal mandate. They were there because of my talent, and they were willing to protect that talent, even from the people who gave me life. But as the days went by, the asshole question kept gnawing at me. My parents weren't stopping. They started calling my grandma's house at all hours. They started sending family representatives, aunts and cousins, to try and talk sense into me. The narrative was shifting from, "I'm hurt," to, "You're mentally unstable." They were telling people that the stress of going pro had caused me to have a breakdown and turn on my loved ones. I started to wonder if I should just give in. Just a little. Maybe if I invited them to one game. Maybe if I had one dinner with each of them. Just to make the noise stop. Just to stop being the villain in everyone's story. I mentioned this to Grandma over dinner one night. She put her fork down and looked me dead in the eye. If you give a shark a drop of blood, does it stop biting, or does it start a feeding frenzy? I knew the answer. You think you're being an asshole because you're finally acting like an adult, she said. And to people who want to treat you like a puppet, an adult is the most dangerous thing in the world. They don't want your love, honey. They want your compliance. There's a big difference. That night, I received a DM from a girl I used to train with. She had seen my parents' posts and the rumors. She told me she was disappointed in me. She said that family is everything, and that no matter what they did, they were my parents. "You only get one mum and one dad," she wrote. "Don't throw them away for a career." I stared at that message for a long time. You only get one mum and one dad. It's the phrase people use when they've had normal parents, who maybe argue over the dishes or forget a birthday. They don't understand what it's like to have parents who use you as a human shield in a 20-year war. They don't understand what it's like to have your medical records turned into a battlefield. I realised then that the world was always going to judge me. To the outsiders, I was the cold-hearted daughter who reached the top and cut the rope. They didn't see the years of me hanging onto that rope until my hands bled. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. If they were going to make this public, then I was going to set the record straight. Not by screaming, not by fighting, but by telling the truth. The truth. It's a funny thing in a family like mine. It's a concept that's always malleable, always shifting depending on who is telling the story. For my dad, the truth was that he was a victim of my mum's manipulation. For my mum, the truth was that she was a martyr who sacrificed everything to protect me from my dad's ego. For me, the truth was just survival. And now, the truth was going to be my weapon. I didn't want to post a long, dramatic Facebook status. I didn't want to get into a comment war with my aunts or my dad's drinking buddies. I wanted to be clean, precise, and absolute. I sat at my laptop in Grandma's guest room, the cursor blinking on a blank document. I thought about the girl who DM'd me, the one who said, "Family is everything." I thought about how much I hated that phrase. Family isn't everything when family is the thing breaking you. I started typing. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a defense. It was a statement of fact. To everyone who has reached out regarding my recent signing, I wrote, I want to address the concerns and the narratives that are currently circulating. Yes, I signed a professional contract. It is the culmination of 14 years of hard work, discipline, and the unwavering support of my grandmother. I chose to keep this moment private because for the first time in my life, I needed a milestone that belonged entirely to me. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keys. This was the part where I had to be careful. I didn't want to sound bitter. I wanted to sound free. For 18 years, my life, my medical care, my sibling relationships, and my sporting events have been the staging ground for a conflict between my biological parents. It reached a point where my safety and well-being required court-mandated separation protocols. When you grow up as a bargaining chip, you learn that every achievement comes with a price tag of conflict. I decided I was no longer willing to pay that price. My decision to exclude my parents and their spouses from my signing was not an act of cruelty or revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. I needed peace to perform at the highest level, and peace is something my parents, unfortunately, cannot coexist with. I love them, but I love my future more than I love their war. I will not be discussing this further. My focus is entirely on my upcoming season and my professional responsibilities. I am grateful for the genuine support I've received, and I ask that my boundaries be respected moving forward. I read it over 3 times. My heart was pounding, the same way it did before a championship match. It was terrifying to put it all out there, to pull back the curtain on the perfect family facade my parents had been trying to project on social media. But it also felt incredibly empowering. I wasn't hiding behind grandma's skirts. I wasn't running away. I was standing my ground. I posted it across all my social media platforms. Then I turned my phone off entirely. I gave it to Grandma and told her to put it in a drawer. I didn't want to see the fallout. I just wanted to go to practice. For the next 3 days, I lived in a bubble. I woke up, ate breakfast with Grandma, went to the training facility, worked until my muscles screamed, and came home. My coach was true to his word. The facility was locked down. No one without an appointment got past the front desk. For the first time, my sanctuary was actually secure. When I finally turned my phone back on, the landscape had shifted entirely. The silence from my parents wasn't an apology. It was a tactical retreat. My mum had deleted her heartfelt post. My dad's passive-aggressive tribute was gone. The aunts and cousins who had been harassing me had gone quiet. Why? Because my post had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had stripped them of their victimhood. When I laid out the truth, the court-ordered separation, the medical appointments, the bargaining chip reality, it became very clear to their social circles that they weren't the aggrieved parents of an ungrateful child. They were the architects of their own exclusion. But not everyone was quiet. The people who actually knew me, my teammates, my old coaches, my best friend, the one from the sibling portrait day, they flooded my messages with support. I remember the security guards at the regional finals. My old coach wrote, "I'm so proud of you for breaking the cycle. You earned this." My best friend sent a voice note, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw the post. You're a badass. You're literally my hero. If they ever show up at a game, I'll tackle them myself." Even my stepbrother, the one my mum's new husband brought into the family, reached out. It was a short text, but it spoke volumes. "Mum and Dad are furious, but honestly, I get it. Good luck this season. Kick some ass." It was a strange feeling. Validation. For 18 years, I had been told that my feelings were dramatic, or that I was too sensitive to the tension. To have other people who had witnessed the collateral damage of my parents' war, tell me that I was right to protect myself? It was like someone had handed me the key to my own mind. I realized that the arsehole question in my head wasn't actually my voice. It was their voice, internalized over a lifetime of manipulation. The guilt wasn't a natural consequence of my actions. It was a programmed response to their expectations. Of course, my parents didn't give up entirely. They never do. A week after my post, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It was a letter from my dad. It was a long, rambling missive about respect and blood ties, and how he was disappointed that I had chosen to air family business in public. He ended it by saying that his door was always open when I was ready to apologize and act like a daughter. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. It was the same old song, just played at a different volume. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into a drawer. I didn't reply. My mum tried a different tactic. She showed up at my grandmother's house one afternoon while I was at practice. According to Grandma, she cried on the porch, claiming she didn't understand what she had done wrong and begging for one more chance to be a part of my life. Grandma, bless her heart, didn't let her in. She stood on the porch, leaned on her cane, and said, "Sarah, your daughter is an adult now. She has a career. She has peace. The only thing you can offer her right now is drama, and she's politely declined the invitation. When you can sit in a room with your ex-husband without calling the police, maybe she'll reconsider. Until then, go home." My mom left sobbing about how cruel Grandma was being. It was a stark realization for me. They weren't going to change. They were fundamentally incapable of prioritizing my well-being over their own grievances. They were addicted to the conflict, and I was just the most convenient excuse to keep fighting. The start of my professional season was approaching rapidly. The media day, the promotional shoots, the team dinners. It was overwhelming, but it was mine. I walked into the stadium for my first official game day. The smell of the turf, the bright lights, the echoing sound of the crowd filtering in. It was electric. I stood in the tunnel, waiting for my name to be called during the introductions. My heart was thumping a familiar rhythm. But this time, I wasn't scanning the crowd for my parents. I wasn't looking to see if my mum was glaring at my stepmum, or if my dad was positioning himself to be louder than my stepdad. I looked up at section 104, row G, right where I had left her a ticket. Grandma was there. She was wearing a jersey with my new name and number on the back. She had a small pair of binoculars around her neck, and she was smiling. A quiet, proud smile. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't trying to draw attention to herself. She was just there for me. And as the announcer called my name over the PA system and the crowd roared, I ran out onto the field. I felt light. I felt fast. I felt completely, utterly free. The guilt was gone. The arsehole question was definitively answered. I wasn't the bad guy for stepping off a battlefield. I was the survivor who finally found her way home. This brings me to a question for all of you listening right now. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace and your own dreams? It's one of the hardest things a person can do, and society often makes us feel guilty for it. What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more stories about breaking cycles and